So, Greg, thank you for coming on the pod. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well. It's been a hot day in London, about 33 degrees, so racing across town for various meetings, but overall really good. Thank you.
Great. So, do you mind starting off by telling me a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. My name is Greg Gormley. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SkootEco Group. We are a climate platform, a climate change platform looking to try and make a difference in the world by helping people understand a little bit more about the issues of climate change, about identifying really helping people understand that there is a carbon footprint created from everything we do and how they can actually start trying to reduce that and moderate that. And then ultimately, any emissions that are still remaining, how can they counter and remove?
That sounds brilliant. Now, I'm someone that's conscious about my carbon footprint, so I'd definitely like to touch on that more a bit later on. For now, do you mind if we go right back to the start of your career when you were 18? I believe you did
Sure.
to university and you jumped straight in and started as an accountant.
So I was one of these strange individuals that actually knew what I wanted to be when I was 10 years of age. And in fact, I can remember at senior school, first day of senior school, everyone had to write a paragraph on what they wanted to be. And I wrote down, I want to be a chartered accountant. And I basically never deviated from that fact. So I did my A levels and I didn't want to go to university. I just wanted to start my accountancy training. So literally on the day of my A levels, I finished on something like a Thursday, and on the Monday, I had a training contract that I started. So it went straight into a training contract after my A level.
Yeah, no break at all there. And so you worked your way up in this accounting company, I believe. Perhaps you could sort of tell me a bit about your early career and what it was like.
So I started with a very small provincial firm initially, and it was really just somewhere that I wanted to get to grips with. They gave me a contract, which was really good. And then I stayed there for an initial 12 months just to get some grounding. There was then the opportunity to join a larger firm that had a London office. And I always had and hankered after trying to move to London, live in London. And then eventually got a training contract with them, which saw me all the way through my accountancy career to qualification. So I don't know if you're aware, but within accountancy, like solicitors, there are a number of exams you have to undergo and take whilst working, which was quite tedious, but took me a few years to qualify. And then once I'd qualified, I decided to sort of leave accountancy practice.
Yeah, no, moving to London resonates with me. That was sort of my goal at 18 as well. So you left and went to work for News Corp, from my understanding. What was it like?
Yeah, it was really good. So I sort of was 24, 25 years of age, had qualified, had stayed for another year or so after qualification and thought, right, I want to enter into industry. And there was a job with a company called NDS, which was News Digital Systems. And they are like the technology division of News Corporation. So they used to do all the card programming for Sky. They did all the clever whiz stuff about all the encryption and everything else. So that was a really exciting move for me. I went in as a management accountant and started really from the bottom up and undertook a number of roles there. But it was a great company, really exciting, and had some great bosses along the way, which taught me a huge amount. And that's where I started to really learn my craft.
Definitely. And I think it's so important having a mentor to sort of guide you. And it's great to find someone that will take you under their wing. So it wasn't long before you helped take them public. I mean, that sounds like a really exciting opportunity. What was it like?
So in total, I did 7, 8 years at News Corporation, undertaking a number of different positions. And was part of the team that helped float them onto NASDAQ, which was a really exciting time. It was back in 2000. The dot-com boom was kicking off. Unfortunately, you're far too young to know about that. But the dot-com boom was a really interesting time where literally people were writing a business idea on a fag packet and coming up with a valuation of $10 million and literally getting funded to the tune of $1 million for 10% of the business. And so we floated for quite a large sum and went shooting up. So we floated at $20 on NASDAQ, shot up to something like 110, and then came crashing back down to about 6, along with everyone else. So that was some really interesting time, seeing some interesting things happen. Floating any business on NASDAQ is always quite challenging. Ours was particularly challenging because we were doing a sale of the hardware division at the same time. So that was a really amazing experience of something that was quite unique and hasn't actually been done before or after, about floating part of the business and then actually selling part of the business all on the same sort of day, which was quite a challenge. And then after that, the sort of euphoria of intense 6 months of work, sort of you're there, sat there, sort of scratching your head thinking, oh, what shall I do now? And I was approached to apply for a CFO role at CME, which I applied for. And it was a really interesting number of interviews that I went to. And there's one funny story about it. It came down to two people, either myself or this other chap. It was a really nice guy. He was a bit older than me. I was quite young at the time. I was still probably in the region of only being 33, 34. And CME was predominantly owned by Ronald Lauder of Estee Lauder. He was the largest shareholder, and he sort of deemed my age as a bit too young. But one thing that I had done is I had a final interview with the CEO, a very large American chap who's about 6'7", a guy called Greg Gormley, and he had an interview and had both of us there. The other candidate was being interviewed and overran time. And they had told me that Fred had to go at a certain time. So I walked in the room and I literally only had half an hour. So I was a bit disappointed to have my sort of hour slot cut. So when I exited the meeting after half an hour, I went and found Fred's PA and said, oh, is Fred having to rush off next? And they said, yeah, he's got to go to the airport. And I said, oh, which one's that? And they said, oh, he's got to go to Heathrow. I said, okay, no problem. So I actually went out to the building, got myself a taxi, sat in the taxi and waited for Fred to come out. And as soon as he came out, I said, oh, Fred, I've got a taxi for you here to Heathrow. So I carried on my interview all the way to Heathrow and they really loved that. So what actually happened was they awarded the job to someone else, which was fine. And I fully understand why. The CFO role for a NASDAQ listed business for probably 33, 34-year-old was probably a bit too much. But they designed a new role for me, which was sort of director of operations. So I had this exciting new role of traveling to Central Europe, visiting different TV stations every week, of which they had, I think, 8 in total. So it's traveling to places like Croatia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Romania, Ukraine, etc. So every sort of week I'd get to another TV station. And I was there sort of helping the CFO, and I sort of became the link between the actual TV station and the London entity. So I was going out, seeing the local CFOs of each TV station, which were all English and employed by us directly, and just understanding sort of the business and what was going on in each region.
I think that tenacity of just getting in the taxi with the CEO sounds amazing. I think that it's really quite remarkable how you managed to make that work. And so it was after this point in time, was it that you chose to sort of step away from corporate life?
Yeah, I think the reality is that after 3 months of flying quite a lot, and I mean a lot, it starts to lose its sheen. And after a sort of extended period of time, I had 2 children as well by then. It became sort of a case of, well, why have I bothered having kids if I'm only there at weekends and then I'm tired at the weekend, etc. So I thought really I probably should look to do something else. And I've done quite an intense period of time in the corporate world. I've sort of trained, qualified, earned my stripes in News Corp, did quite a lot at CME, and then thought, you know what? One of the things that I did miss in my career at that point in time was that I didn't actually produce anything. And at the time, my brothers had a property company that they were looking at expanding, and they actually built houses and housing developments, etc. So I thought actually it'd be quite fun to go and join them for a little while and have a stint at actually making something.
Oh, brilliant. And was it that sort of step back that you're after, or was running your own business just as intense as it was before?
Well, I stupidly was under the illusion that, oh, great, if I'm running my own business, I can dictate my own diary and I can have time off and play golf and see my family and everything else. The reality behind it is that isn't true at all. In fact, if anything, you work harder because everything is your responsibility and you have to fulfill that responsibility as well. So from that perspective, I sort of jumped out the frying pan into the fire because I worked just as hard, if not harder, and saw my family, but still didn't see as much of them as I wanted to. But it was a great period of time. It was an interesting period of building a number of housing developments, which I'd never done before. So I got really involved in a lot of projects, all the way from planning to speccing out properties, looking at plans, all sorts of things that became a new sort of skill, if you like. And we did that for 4 years until, unfortunately, 2008 crash, which I think a lot of people, anyone involved in property knows the 2008 crash really, really well. And it was an interesting time. There was really strange things happening in the marketplace, like Campthing Bank, which was an Icelandic bank that actually went bust. Bizarrely, the Bank of England were trying to stop pension funds flowing out to the entity because all it was an online bank. And so people were set tens of millions of pounds online. And I think from memory, they brought them down under the Terrorism Act, and Campthing Bank went bust, which was a very strange thing. But it's never happened since and never will do.
And yeah, it's remarkable. I think so many businesses were just so shocked by the crisis that weren't prepared for it at all. And how did your business cope? Did it go under or did it manage to survive?
Yeah, unfortunately, well, part of the reason we had a lot of borrowing with Campthing, and we had a number of projects running with them. And unfortunately, because Campthing went bust, it just literally put a stop on any funding. So you've got these part-funded projects where you're expected to pay contractors, etc., and you're literally sat in limbo. And there was a big article written about it afterwards about how the liquidator had just sat on their hands. And what they were trying to do was they were trying to sell the whole book. And so for the first 2 months, all they did was focus on selling the book, which actually caused massive problems for so many people. And in the end, the company unfortunately didn't survive, which was really sad. So all that hard work went to nothing.
Yeah, that must have been incredibly difficult. And I imagine, after putting all your time and your energy into something, to having it fall through, it's been really tough. And what was it like in the wake of the crash? Sort of that process of rebuilding. How did you sort of get back on your feet and come on to your next idea?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how long these things can take to unravel. So although the crash happened in sort of December 2008, really the actual impact from that and the unwinding and unraveling of the business going under took me all the way till probably 2011, sort of end of 2010. So a long period of time, which was really, really difficult, problematic. And actually, I look back at my career and think that was probably a really, really low point. And, you start to understand sorts of different things in life. Prior to that, things like suicide, I would never have understood. But actually going through what I went through, it was such a difficult period of time where you woke in the morning and literally it felt like there was an elephant sat on your chest. To even take breath was difficult. And so, I look at things now and understand a lot more why people do sort of commit suicide and face so many problems. And actually, it's one of those things that I'm a lot more sympathetic about, because until you've actually been there, it's really difficult. And I think one of the things about any entrepreneur or any business owner is you have to have resilience, because during your career, you will be knocked down. There will be a period in time where you're knocked down. It may be a black swan event where it comes out of the blue and you're absolutely flawed. And the resilience is about how you actually get back up, and then how you start again, and then how you go again. And that is the really hard thing. But in life, I think you're always going to have an event that's going to affect you. No person is going to not have something like that happen. And it is about how you cope with it and how you deal with it. And that's where you need your family, friends, and your network really to help support you. And that's why I think in this day and age as well, the whole thing about mental health is talked about a lot more, which I think is really important. It wasn't really back then so much, that's sort of 14 years ago. And so, I think it's been really progressive of what's happened today. And I think it's a really positive thing.
It must have been incredibly difficult. And I think, as you mentioned, that resilience is key. And I'm sure we'll touch on it later, but there's another example in your career of considerable resilience, which we'll get to. It was after this period of sort of rebuilding and finding your feet again that you came to start Bink, this payments and loyalty platform. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about where the idea for Bink came from and what the business did.
So Bink was created in 2014. So during that time, sort of 2010, 11 to 14, I ended up helping a number of different SMEs look at how they operate. So I could take big practice, best practice, and put it into SME, look at helping them understand their business better, how they could grow it, how they could bring in investment, and then ultimately how could they sell it as well. So that was that period of time, which was quite interesting. 2014 was an idea that happened really through a friend of mine who became my business partner. His wife was shopping in Boots. They're going on holiday, and when they go on holiday, they just buy tons of stuff. So they probably had about a basket, £400 of Boots stuff, everything. He's got 3 kids and they're all bundling all the stuff in. And when it came to checkout, it was like, have you got your Boots Advantage card? And his wife went, oh no, it's not here. I haven't got it. And the assistant goes, well, I can give you a voucher that, you can validate as long as you do it in 7 days. And they said, well, we're flying tomorrow. So, that's just not going to happen. We're going to lose out on all these points. And he sort of thought about this idea saying, why is it so difficult to collect your loyalty points to be thanked by these brands? So why can't you just have it sort of linked to your payment card? Because actually you have to have your payment card on you because you have to pay. And this was sort of before Apple Pay and everything else had really taken off. But any kind of payment platform network, you should be able to link your loyalty program to it. So you get your rewards and points every time you shop. And that was really the premise of Bink, which I think was ahead of its time. And it sort of went on and raised a lot of money and sort of tried to push the whole loyalty networks about working in this way, which it's sort of done to some modicum of success.
Absolutely. And I think these big brands depend on customer loyalty to survive. And I think they definitely don't reward us as much as they should do. They make it far too difficult. So from what I understand, Bink grew really quickly, received around 45 million in funding and a high valuation within just a few years. What was that early process of growth like, and how was it receiving funding as a first time founder, which I know can be really difficult?
Yeah. It was, naivety is a wonderful thing. Sometimes when you don't know and what you talk about, and I look back about what I must have sounded like, the confidence amongst us was just amazing. And we grew the team really quickly. We had some wonderful people on board, really sort of dedicated people. And we had a great network and actually raised a lot of money very quickly. And then we looked at how we deployed that money effectively and then started to grow. So that was 2015 was when the company really started to go. And then all the way up until 2018, it was running pretty fast and at some pace, right up until the 22nd of June, which was a very specific date.
Yeah. And do you mind telling us what happened on that date?
Yeah. And so 22nd of June, 2018, it was 3.5 years of running Bink. I was headed to London. It was a Friday afternoon. The weather was beautiful. And I thought, right, shall I go to London on my motorbike? And I thought, actually, do you know what? London's going to be really difficult. It's going to be really busy. Lots of people going to be around. I tell you what, I'll catch the train, but I'll take my motorbike from my house to the train station, which was only 4.5 miles. Unfortunately, on that trip, I managed to have a head-on collision with a car at 60 miles an hour with my bike. Ended up catapulting across down the road, landing on my wrist, which snapped, smashing my shoulder. I ripped my knee off. I then hit my face. Even though I had a full face helmet on, I still managed to fracture my eye socket and break my nose. So unfortunately, I was pretty badly injured and I was airlifted to hospital. So airlifted to hospital, St. George's in Tooting. And it was pretty horrific. Two good things, fulfilled 2 things on my bucket list. I got a free helicopter ride, which was great. And then also I ended up appearing on 24 Hours at A&E. So I got to be a TV star for a day.
Yeah, I mean, that just sounds horrific. 24 Hours in A&E must have been an experience in itself, I'm sure. But what was the recovery process like from that crash? How did you sort of get back on your feet again?
Yeah. So literally, I must admit, the NHS is quite amazing. In terms of mass trauma, the NHS is the best place to be by far. So I was taken by helicopter. I crashed at about 3:30. By 5:30, I'm in the end. By 6 p.m., I sort of landed. And the reason that I agreed to do 24 Hours at A&E is I wanted to see what had happened from when I landed. By then, they'd given me a whole mix of drugs. So I was not really compos mentis. So I didn't really understand what was happening. But literally from when I landed, I had a whole group of people around me. I had a full MRI scan. I had 2 consultants examining me along with a team of about 4 nurses. And then from there, I was stabilized and put into a recovery room and basically left to settle till 8 a.m. the next day. I was woken up every I think it was every 2 hours just to check I was all right, which was a really weird experience when you're trying to sleep. But 8 a.m. the next day, I had an operation, really from 8 a.m. till about 4 p.m. Again, stabilized me. That was working on my leg and my knee, putting it back and everything else. Put me back in the ward, fed me, just stabilized me again. Sunday morning came, 8 a.m., next set of operation, which was on my arm, where they took a skin graft from my leg to sort my arm out as well. That was an operation from 8 a.m. to about 2 p.m. Again, stabilized me, fed me. And then the Monday came, 8 a.m. again, another operation, this time on my face. It was, I think, 8 a.m. till about 12:30, just sorting out my fractured eye socket and my nose and everything else. And then, so by Monday evening, I sort of really started to come around, hadn't had any more drugs, etc. And I was just like, wow, what in the hell has happened? It sort of really hit me for six. And that's when I started thinking a little bit more deeply about, wow, I was really, really lucky. And I was ever so lucky. And the reality behind it, I was thinking, if I had have died, what would they have written in my obituary? And I could only really come up with one thing, that I worked really, really hard. And I couldn't actually think of anything else. So I thought, wow, whatever I do next, when I'm out of this, when I'm recovered, I have to have more purpose and mission in the business that I run. The recovery itself was tough, really, really tough. I literally had to start from scratch in terms of pretty much learning to walk again and just going back with lots of physio, just trying to bend my leg and just trying to get back to being normal. And it's amazing. It's unbelievable what you take for granted. Just the ability of just getting up, standing up and walking 10, 15 yards and then sitting down. Just that whole process just was like unbelievable. And you just think, wow, I took that for granted and it was so bad. And when you're sort of walking again and you have a Zimmer frame and then you come away from the Zimmer frame and everything else and you're walking by yourself. And I was so slow to start with. And you look about how your foot just lands on any kind of concrete or grass and the undulations, and it's so difficult to take. You just take that totally for granted, that you can just run and walk and it's just nothing to you. So yeah, it really did rebalance me a lot.
No, absolutely. And it sounds like we're very lucky to have you here today. So that's the first thing. But it's just, you're right. We take so many things for granted in our day-to-day life. And I'm lucky to have never been in anything near like that. But I can imagine it was incredibly challenging. And you mentioned, in your obituary that you work hard. And I think from my understanding, you were in a board meeting just a few weeks after the crash. You showed up and that didn't stop you.
Yeah, I have this weird sort of gene in me, I think, that just drives me. And literally from the hospital, so from the Monday when I was free from my operations, I managed to get out of the hospital by the Thursday. So I was just about sort of up and about, and they let me go, mainly because the hospital was so hot. It was unbelievable. It was a hot period of weather that we had, and they couldn't open the windows and it was stifling. And then if you've ever stayed in the hospital, it is such a noisy place to be. It's so noisy. So I was just like focused on getting out there. So I was out by the Thursday, and I knew on Monday, the following Monday, there was a board meeting. And I thought, right, I'm going to attend this board meeting, and I could literally hardly move, let alone walk. So I got a cab to pick me up from my house and drive me all the way to the RAC building. And then I managed to get out of this cab and hobble into the RAC, caught the lift up to where I knew the room that we'd reserved, and basically sat and waited for my fellow board members. And when they all walked in, they were like, what on earth are you doing here? And they let me stay for an hour. And then they said, right, we're sending you home. You look terrible. So they sent me back home in the taxi. And yeah, and it's like, I think I've learned now that you're not indispensable. You don't have to be there and you don't have to do anything. And you do have to rely on other people. But at the time I was like, no, it's always about me. I have to be there, blah, blah, blah. But that's not true.
Well, I think, that drive you had to get up and make that meeting is incredible. And I can only imagine the look on the board members' faces seeing you there. 1 week post crash. But yeah, I think that's quite amazing. So within this recovery period that we've talked about, that I believe you came upon your new idea, Scoot. Perhaps you could tell me where the idea came from and how the business has grown since that point in time.
Sure. So I got back home and, I was recovering through physio, really focused a lot on physio, put a lot of effort into that. And, I sort of ventured back to Bink a little bit, but it sort of run without me. And by the January, I took the decision that let's let the company carry on without me. That's fine. And let's focus on my own business again. And the idea of Scoot was initially a totally separate idea, stemmed from my daughter. My daughter was 17 at the time. She'd just passed her driving test. So she was 17 in the January, and by the sort of end of March, she'd passed the driving test, was driving around. This was within 5 days of her passing. She's going to the cinema with her friends and she's leaving, and it's like 7 p.m. I said, right, okay, you're picking up friends and going to the cinema and coming. Yeah. Okay. I'll see you probably about 11:30. So she goes off. 11:30 comes and goes. In fact, midnight comes and goes. So I send her a text just saying, oh, hi, is everything okay? I get a text back. Everything's fine. No problem. I'll see you in a bit. So I thought, right, okay, I'll hang around a bit and watch TV. And I sort of watched a film until AM came, and I was like, hi, hello, are you okay? Are you coming back? And she's like, oh yeah, sorry, text me again. Just been with some friends. I'm on my way home. So I go to bed because I'm pretty tired, and I fall asleep. And then I woke up at 4:30 AM and she's still not home. So now I ring her up and she doesn't answer. So I'm getting a bit worried. So I text her saying, where on the hell are you? And she responds saying, oh yeah, just coming back, just been with some other friends. So I was like, so anyway, she gets in at 5 AM. So I saw her and just said, look, we'll talk about it tomorrow. So the next day arrives and I was like, what happened? She said, well, I went to the cinema, took my friends, dropped them all back home, was coming home. And then I had a Snapchat request. And I was like, what's a Snapchat request? She goes, well, people ask if anyone's doing lifts to give them a lift from the station, home, etc., so they don't have to pay a taxi. And I said, okay. And what do? Oh, they pay me. And I just let them know how much they have to pay me, and they pay me money. And I was like, okay. And who are these people? Oh, they're my friends on Snapchat. I said, how many friends have you got on Snapchat? Oh, about 600. And I was like, what? So I was saying you're giving lifts to random people. She goes, yeah, and I earned 85 quid. And I was like, well, isn't that illegal? Aren't you acting as a taxi? So she said, well, I don't know, but I earned 85 quid. So anyway, I started finding out about all the Road Traffic Act 1988, Section 121, which is all about giving people lifts and taking money, etc. And I was thinking about this more and more, and sort of a bit worried about it, and sort of did some research on it. And really the demographic from 17 to 21 use Snapchat still a fair bit, or certainly did back then. And a lot of people do lifts on it and were invalidating their insurance. So I came up with the idea of basically creating an Uber app for friends. And within that journey, we could actually help take cars off the road in terms of not being used at a place like universities, etc. Ultimately removing pollution and helping the planet. So it'd save people money, it'd help the planet. And then for any journey undertaken, we'd look to plant a tree to remove the carbon footprint of that journey. So we started this whole app design. We got it all built. We raised a fair bit of money through the network that I had previously, and then launched sort of Uber app for friends, and it was called Scoot. And this was in March 2020. And that date's very relevant because in March 2020 is when we went into lockdown.
Yeah, that must have been, it's incredibly bad timing. And I can only imagine your heart sinking when you saw that news article and all the work that had gone in to make it happen.
Yeah, we had. And we had this great app. It was such a good app that we've actually got patents on in the US and Canada. And it worked really well. So we reversed the Uber effect. So instead of you putting out a ride and an Uber driver chooses you, you could put out a ride and then it would highlight what friends were nearest and how much they would charge you each, which was based on the calculation. And then you chose the driver, which could be your best friend as opposed to your closest friend. So yeah, we went into lockdown and we sat there scratching our heads saying, God, what do we do now? Within about 6 weeks after the lockdown, we're still working out what to do when we saw this competition from Innovate UK saying, can you help during and post COVID? And we looked at our product and thought, and this is when everything was kicking off about click and collect being all the slots being fully booked up in advance and no one could actually get shopping delivered. So we thought we could run an errands program and help people. So we put in a competition for Innovate UK, which we won. So we won a £50,000 competition. So we recoded the app to allow for you to send and ask up to 10 friends to pick up your click and collect shopping. The first friend that said they'll do it informed all the others that the job was fulfilled. It then tracked them when they were picking up and starting the job. So you could tell as a person asking for it, see where they were. And then they'd leave you at your front door with a picture and press complete. And then it would send it through to you saying, look outside your front door, it's there, and here's the picture. And then you could tip them £5 to say thank you. So that was really good. And we undertook about 4,000 errands during COVID. And we even won an extension on the competition to sort of try and grow it further, which was another 25,000. And that took us all the way into sort of March 2021, which, everything seems such a blur of that period now. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it sounds like a brilliant idea. It's something that I would have certainly used during the pandemic. And I know when you mentioned about your daughter giving lifts, that's something that I've witnessed my sister doing as well. And if only I'd known that she was invalidating her insurance, I probably would have let her know. But that's fascinating. And it was from this sort of network of friends that I believe you continued to build upon the app to Scoot to be what it is today, which is a carbon offsetting app. How's that sort of transition been?
So when people were starting to be released from lockdowns and people were starting to go back in the office, even though we've still not fully returned, we started looking at the sort of business measurement and said, actually, one of the best ways to accelerate this is to work with large corporates and help them promote internally, saying people can share journeys to work. And it's something to reduce their scope 3 footprint as well, in terms of what their CO2 footprint is. Ultimately, corporates weren't ready to recommend people to share car journeys. They'd rather you caught COVID on public transport rather than catching it from recommending something that they did. So we tried it for probably about 5 months to sell it in, and it was getting no traction. And so we sort of had to have an internal review about what are we trying to do. And we sort of came across the fact that, look, ultimately what we've tried to do is reduce congestion and pollution. And then we've removed the carbon footprint from the journey. So we've planted trees. So why don't actually we pivot the platform and look at helping identify people's carbon footprint, and then we can plant trees to counter it and remove it. And that was the start by sort of September, October time, that idea about how we could create this whole platform. And then we started to move that all the way into 2022, where it took probably 6 months to develop it. And by the sort of spring of 22, we had our sort of basic structure of the platform, of a planting system in the back end of how we could actually start helping people identify, avoid, and counter their carbon footprint.
Yeah, I've had a look at Scoot. I think it's really brilliant that you're putting carbon offsetting straight into the hands of consumers. For me personally, it's always something I've looked to do whenever I've been on a flight, and it's made really easy, but I know it's not, I'm really bad at it. That's not something I do more wide. So the fact I've had a look, plans start at just £2 a month, allowing people to plant 2 trees and remove 30 bottles from going into the ocean. I think it's brilliant. And what role do you think carbon offsetting has to play more widely in the bid to be sustainable?
Yeah, so there's lots of debate about this, and it's very hotly contested. A lot of people say, no, we should just focus on reducing our carbon footprint today and then look at using carbon offsets and carbon removals in the future from probably 2030. I say that is absolutely crazy. It is far, far too late. Quite often when you're looking at reducing your emissions, you'll only be looking to reduce, say, by 30% by 2030. So over the next sort of 6 years, you're saying, right, I'm going to try and focus on my business to firstly identify the baselines, to identify what my carbon footprint is today at 100%. And I'm going to then spend the next 6 years trying to reduce it by 30%. So there's still 70% that remains. My point to that is, well, if you're not even looking at that 70%, why don't you offset that 70% today and actually offset it for the next 6 years? And I think it's an unforgivable excuse not to do that. And a lot of sustainability directors say, oh no, that's just buying our way out and people won't focus on the reduction. And that's why I'm saying, well, look, if you've identified your reduction as being a capability of 30%, then only offset that 70% that you're not even trying to address. And the reality behind it is to actually reduce your carbon footprint by even 30%, is almost impossible today. If everyone, for example, tried to switch to renewable power tomorrow, it's not possible. Not everyone could do it. So there'd be power outages. So it's actually doing everything in moderation and balance. And that's what I'm a massive believer in. So I think in this world, there is a huge place for carbon offsets and carbon removals and using a carbon credit strategy. And then there's the debate about whether carbon offsets are bad. It should just be carbon removal, because carbon offsets don't give you a net offset removal, but carbon removals do. But for me, carbon offsets have huge social purpose. So often carbon offsets will be helping people on the other side of the planet who truly have nothing. And so not only are you reaching your carbon net zero goals, but actually you're helping your fellow man on the planet who truly has nothing and is in real poverty.
No, absolutely. I agree. And I think that's core to Scoot's mission from what I've read. I understand you're a B Corp. How's that, being a B Corp, sort of tied into your mission and your purpose?
Well, being a B Corp means that you change your articles of association to put a specific purpose in. So you put the people and planet together with profits, and you give them equal weighting. It doesn't mean that you're a charity or a quasi-charity or a social impact company, but what you are is a B Corp, and you're putting those alignment goals together. So whatever we do, we're very transparent. Whatever we try and do, we always try and make sure that there is a social purpose behind it as well. And to be honest, it gives trust and belief from our clients and customers that there's been an audit undertaken from us. We've even been awarded Best for the World for corporate governance and transparency. That puts us in the top 5% of B Corps across the planet. And that gives us, again, additional accreditation, giving more comfort to large corporates who utilize us to do something that is quite often discussed, and things like greenwashing is talked about. And it's something that we can give them comfort about, that we do the nth degree, minute detail, so no one can start accusing us of that.
Yeah, I think the triple bottom line is so important to all organizations, and it's definitely not recognized enough in valuations across the board today, but there's definitely more attention coming to it, as you mentioned. So going back to yourself as a leader, what would you say drives you today, and how has this changed since you were 18 and striving to be an accountant?
I think I love working hard. I love working hard. It's what drives me. It's what gets me up. Both my children complain that I don't really have any hobbies. But I say, well, business is my hobby. I do like to go to the gym, keep fit. That's important because I do that for my mental state, just as much as physical. But for me, I think what drives me is really trying to get to understand a business, understand what drives and motivates other people, understand what motivates your client, and try and get them to believe in you, that the product you're offering them is their best solution, and then how you can grow a business from scratch. And I love taking things from the start and seeing it all the way through. I'm a great believer in standing aside when you have a business that's at a certain level, and then you let an operator come in and take it to the next level. It's a bit like having children. Yeah, you take them for their first few years and then you send them to school. You don't keep them at home and self-school. I'm not a proponent of that. I think you hand the reins over to the next person. I think a business is really similar. I think there's lots of founders who want to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. And the reality is they're not going to be. There are very, very few people that can take a business from start, inception, grow it, scale up, and then take it to a huge operation and then actually make it worth hundreds of billions. There's very, very few people in the world that can do that whole transition process.
No, I really admire your passion for business there. And I think that's a really interesting message that you said about CEOs stepping back and allowing someone to take over. I think a really good example of that is Ben Francis at Gymshark. He raised the company from the ground and then stepped aside as CEO, brought in someone with much more experience. And I think that's one of the reasons the business has grown to a multi-billion pound company that it is today.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think a lot of people say, oh, but it's my baby. And I get that. I fully understand it. Bing was my baby and I had to let it go. I think once you let it go once, it just helps you and you can actually see it being on a better trajectory. So from that point of view, I think it's an important lesson for people to appreciate. Doesn't mean they need to exit the business, because Ben Francis hasn't. He's stayed in. He's actually taken on the role that he enjoys more. Being a CEO can quite often be a bit lonely because you sometimes have to make difficult decisions and some people don't always like you for them. You're never going to keep everyone happy. So if you've become CEO to be popular, you're under a massive illusion because you will not be popular all the time at all.
Yeah, I think it's probably very tough to be popular as a CEO. So you've obviously learned a lot over your career. You've come a long way. What would you say your approach to personal development is? Have you had a mentor that's guided you, like you did in your early days as an accountant?
Um, I've sort of worked with people that I've really admired. I haven't had a mentor as such, but going back, I would actually ask people to be more officially my mentor. Don't be afraid of asking. And I sort of look back and think, yeah, I probably should have asked them to mentor me more. So I've never had a specific mentor as such. I do get approached quite often about whether I need a mentor coach now. I don't sort of probably stop for breath enough to think about it. In reality, in hindsight, I probably should, because, you look at any kind of professional, they still have instructors and teachers, ranging from golf to all sorts, and you never stop learning. So you take the approach of, oh no, I don't need to learn from anyone is just wrong. You can always improve yourself. And to be honest, the day you stop learning is the day you die.
Definitely. No, absolutely. It's really important to keep learning. But there's so much to be said for just learning on the job, as you say, and taking those time to reflect yourself and focus on what you need to do next. What advice would you give to others looking to set up a startup these days?
Well, first thing, don't be afraid of asking anything. Literally, go and ask people, go and badger them, pester them. Even if they tell you to get lost, that's a good result. Don't let people ignore you. Just keep on pestering. And ultimately, I think that the biggest piece is the knockbacks. Don't worry about being knocked back. You will be knocked back and you'll be knocked down. It's about how you get back up. It's really hard to take the knock sometimes, not personally, but you cannot. Business is business. Even if someone berates your business, don't take it personally. Just move forward. Have passion and belief in it. If you don't have passion in your business, you won't be good at it. So this is why I say to anyone that is working, whether they're in their own business or not, working in a corporate career, if you do not enjoy it, do not do it. Do something else, because you spend a large percentage of your life at work. So do something that you enjoy, because you don't want to look back in 20 years and say, oh, I hated work. That would be the worst thing ever. So that's probably one of the biggest pieces of advice. Be passionate about what you do, love what you do. If you don't, then do something else.
I completely agree. And I think passion's key, because if you want to achieve those extraordinary results, you need to put in that extraordinary amount of effort to achieve them. So Greg, it's been brilliant talking to you today. That's all the questions I've had for you. I don't know if there's any parting words you'd like to leave on the podcast, but if not, how can people get in contact and find out more about Skoot?
I'm on LinkedIn. It's SkootEco, so SKOOT.eco. We're a B-Corp, as I say. People can email me. It's greg@skoot.eco as well. More than happy to answer questions from people. Any advice I have is, don't listen to other people. And you hear it time and time again. People have said, oh, that's a rubbish idea. That's never going to work. And then they go and do something amazing. So that is absolutely true. Do not believe in other people, in what they say. Have passion and belief in what you do. Have resilience. The other thing that you must be aware of as well is being able to pivot. You'll have an idea for a business. Don't get too set on it, because the reality behind it is the end result will probably be different from what you start with. And always look to be relevant. So make sure your audience, you're always relevant to it. So you have to be able to pivot. And so you're not too focused or hung up on an idea all the time.
That makes complete sense, and it's brilliant advice. Thank you again, Greg. Really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, George, for having me. It's been really good speaking to you, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future.